What's going on, guys? Welcome to the next video. Today I'm going to be ranking all 7 films in the Conjuring universe, including spin-offs like The Curse of La Llorona and The Nun. Now I know this isn't exactly everybody's favorite horror franchise, and it's certainly not the best, but there's something really unnerving about the fact that they're based on allegedly true stories, some of them at least. I don't exactly see a point in posting a review for every single one of these films. It's just less efficient, and this way I can kind of just give you guys my general brief thoughts before grading the film and then moving on. I also want to mention real quick before we get started that there will be mild spoilers for these films, but then again, there's nothing really spoilery to look out for. They're horror movies. So without further ado, let's jump into the list. In last place is 2014's Annabelle. Now, this is actually the first film in the Conjuring universe that I saw, unfortunately for me. I saw it at Meyer. It was like one of those really cheap DVDs, and I was like, so why not? And, well, this is the one movie in the franchise that I think really has absolutely nothing going for it. It has the worst writing, it has the worst acting, it has the worst characters, and I honestly think it's one of the least scary. It did have one admittedly suspenseful scene involving an elevator, but besides that, this is just a boring, bland, disposable film full of dumb characters, lame jump scares, and a story that I don't think really justifies it being a prequel to the original Conjuring. This film is also really predictable because it starts off with a home invasion and you see one of the attackers dying while holding onto the doll, so you know exactly what's going to happen. I highly recommend you just skip over this film. If you happen to sit down and watch all 7 of these, just skip this one. You're not really missing a whole lot. I'm going to give it a D-. In 6th place is The Nun. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those people that didn't want a Valak spin-off at all. In fact, I think she's one of the scariest demons in the entire franchise. But this film does not do the character justice whatsoever. I will say that the Romanian setting gives it a sort of atmosphere. I'll give that to the film. But the demon doesn't even really show up too much in the film, and there isn't a single original scare. It's mostly just characters walking through dark spaces with a lantern. They turn, something's not there or moved or something. They turn back, and there's a jump scare. It's very generic. I also never understood why they had to cast Taissa Farmiga as a character in this universe, because she looks very much like her sister, but supposedly they're completely unrelated, the characters themselves, so I'm not sure why they had to cast her. And the last 10 minutes of this film is really the cherry on top that makes this a boring experience. It tries to connect to The Conjuring 2 and how Valak ends up being in that movie. But if you rewind this movie about 10 minutes after learning of the plot twist, it doesn't really make sense at all. I'm going to give The Nun a D+. Number 5 is The Curse of La Llorona. Now, this one always felt a little bit out of place to me because it's that one film in the franchise that feels very loosely connected to the others and almost unrelated. And you would think that they would give that they would give the filmmaker a chance to do something really original, but I feel like what we got in the end was the exact opposite of that. I will say that I thought the setup was actually intriguing. There's even a really nice suspenseful scene in a car where the ghost is kind of rolling down the windows and everything. But once, the plot really gets into gear, it turns into a completely bland, generic ghost story, and it becomes just as disposable as the films previously mentioned on the list. I also have to mention that the performances were pretty good. In particular, Linda Cardellini was alright, but a cast can't carry a film that has poor lighting, poor cinematography. This movie also didn't make good use of the actual legend of La Llorona. It's a Hispanic legend, of course, so I'm not sure why it doesn't take place in Mexico. That would have been a better idea. And also, there's just all sorts of really interesting directions they could have taken this movie, but they don't. I'm going to give The Curse of La Llorona a D+. Number 4 is Annabelle Comes Home. Now, I know some people genuinely think that this is a good movie, and of course you're entitled to your own opinion, so that is perfectly fine, but for me, this is a film that was always, at best, a guilty pleasure, and at worst, a complete melodrama, or almost soap opera, of the better films of the franchise. Now, my problems with this film kind of start from the ground up. So if you have a daughter that needs to be babysat, but you also have a room in your house full of haunted, cursed artifacts, maybe you should consider taking your daughter to a nanny rather than inviting in 2 stupid teenagers to babysit her and, of course, wreak havoc. Or at least take the key with you. I mean, they have a key to this haunted room, yet they leave it in one of the most obvious spots you could possibly imagine in an office. And despite the fact that they actually try to give the babysitter that causes all this havoc a backstory, it's not enough to excuse the behavior that she has in the film of literally going around and touching each and every artifact. Even after she asks the daughter of Lorraine and Ed Warren, is all of this real? And, she doesn't say no, so maybe you shouldn't have touched all that shit. So of course her meddling causes Annabelle to get loose and activate all of the other artifacts and spirits that are present in the room, and all hell breaks loose and it becomes a complete jump scare fest one after the other. There actually was one subplot in this movie that I wish was explored more because it was actually pretty good. We see McKenna Grace playing Judy, the daughter of the Warrens, as she's at school and she's getting bullied, and you kind of see what having ghost hunters as a parent, as parents can do to a child and affect their growing up. But the film never really explores that beyond this one scene, which was disappointing. Around halfway into the film, when the ghosts start getting out and everything just goes to hell, it becomes, like I said, set up for a jump scare, the character runs to a different room, rinse and repeat. It is the most bland thing you could possibly imagine. And I mean, if that's what you want out of a movie, a horror movie, if you want to just go in and have jump scares constantly, then you'll enjoy this. But my god, there's even a scene involving a werewolf, and it looked really cheap and stupid, and the first thing that popped into my head was Goosebumps. That's when you know your Conjuring spin-off has done something wrong. In the end, Annabelle Comes Home is a fun guilty pleasure movie, but it's too unoriginal and too stupid for its own good. I'm giving it a C-. In third place is Annabelle Creation. Finally, a good film I can talk about. So this one kind of serves as a raw origin story for the Annabelle doll. It takes place before both of the other spin-offs, but it actually becomes a lot more than that. The film follows two orphans played by Talitha Bateman and Lulu Wilson, as two orphans that are very close friends. In fact, I would say the driving force of this movie is their friendship. And because of that, you actually start to feel invested in their story. You want to see what happens with them. I also really like the kind of isolated, middle-of-nowhere orphanage setting that they chose for this one. It gave it a different sort of tone, but still very familiar if you like the other films in the franchise. The acting, the tone, and the pacing all feel spot on. I'm not saying that this is a perfect film, it definitely isn't, and it relies a lot on jump scares, like most of the films on this list, particularly in the third act, but at least they're well set up jump scares, and we're following characters that I actually care about. But of course, at the same time, what's familiar can also start to feel a bit redundant. It has a very similar premise to all the other films in that some people move into a home, weird things start happening, eventually someone becomes possessed. In fact, there's one sequence in the movie where one of the girls in the orphanage is possessed and chasing somebody else around. I think it is the least suspenseful scene in the entire film because, oh, you walk around a corner and there's a little girl standing there staring at you. Not really that scary in comparison to a lot of the other things that this universe has presented to us. Nevertheless, this is definitely the best of the Annabelle spin-offs, and in fact is one of my favorites in the entire franchise. 100% worth watching. I'm going to give it a B-. In second place is The Conjuring. Now, James Wan's introduction to this horror franchise is still the scariest by far. A lot of people do think that this film is overrated, and I can see why you would say that. It does borrow heavily from other cult classics such as Poltergeist and The Exorcist, but there's a lot more to The Conjuring than meets the eye. This is the movie that also introduces us to Ed and Lorraine Warren, played by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, and it does a really good job of making it feel like these are real people, not just characters in a movie that are going to be the foil to whatever kind of evil is infesting someone's home. And as far as the family that ends up being haunted in their new home, I think they did a really good job of making us care about them as well, which is very important, because if you have a ghost story with lame characters, you're kind of just rooting for the ghosts. I also think that the original Conjuring has the best setup. The first 45 minutes or so, the hauntings and the strange, occurrences start very slow, and it does a very good job of building the suspense. This is a horror classic that does a lot of things right, and I think it kind of reinvigorated everyone's kind of appreciation for horror, as you see a lot of franchises kind of got reopened around the time that The Conjuring released. I'm going to give it a B+. But in first place for me is The Conjuring 2. Now the reason I like this one just a little bit more than the original Conjuring is that it has everything that made the original so good, all of the puzzle pieces, and then some. This time there are more demons, more stakes, and more drama. And while this film kind of explores just another investigation that the Warrens conducted, much like the first film, Ed and Lorraine feel much more involved in the plot, especially with Vera Farmiga's connection to Valak, or the nun, which by the way has one of the scariest scenes in the entire franchise for me, which is the scene with the painting where you see the head move, or the shadow move into the painting and then charges at her. I still think that's my favorite scene in the entire franchise. On top of that, you have great performances, a couple of nice plot twists that I actually didn't see coming, and incredible production design thanks to James Wan's creativity. This film is by no means a masterpiece or perfect, but it very much encapsulates exactly what I want from a sequel and from horror in general. I'm going to give The Conjuring 2 an A-. Well guys, that's it for this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and let me know in the comments how you would rank these 7 films. I'm very curious to see what everyone's opinions are. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.